Hello, WordNerds! We are live. It is Sunday, March 14th, and thanks for joining us. It's really bright in my office. Yay, daylight savings. Hello to everyone.
Daylight right now. I'm so bright. This is great.
Nice.
I'm in like this little dark cave.
Yeah. Today we are going to be doing a workshop. If you've never joined us for one of these before, the way it works is we try to pick an aspect of writing and dig really deep into it. And we kind of break down the mechanics of it. And then we also have guided exercises where you will use your own works in progress and then try and apply. We'll all be trying to apply the things that we're talking about to our personal projects together. So today we are talking about dialogue. I have all my notes up here. I do have some slides, and I have a lot of notes that I took for this chat. And I have links to both of those in the description box if that would be helpful to you at all during the chat. It's there. Also, if you just want it after the fact, all of that stuff is there. Let me know if it's not working for anyone, but it should be. I saw some people in there earlier. I put the link to the document in the description box, and it was early enough that I thought no one would see that I had done that and I could finish editing it. And then 3 people popped into it. So if that was one of you, now you have seen my process. I have some slides. Go. Apologies if there's any technical difficulties. Also, feel free to ask any dialogue questions or anything, and we will try to answer them. As with everything, this is all subjective. There's no wrong way to write a book. These are just common dialogue conventions that we've learned throughout studying writing. If you hate them, you don't have to follow them, and you don't have to tell us that you hate us. It's fine. So I have a quote here up at the top from Susan Dennard, because at first I wanted to talk about the intersection of voice and dialogue, because in my opinion, the two just go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. So Susan said, voice is the filter through which the point of view character expresses thoughts, interactions, reactions, and exposition. This filter dictates a character's diction as well as personality and style. And so my first question for you guys is, how much do you think about character voice when you are writing dialogue?
I think for me, it comes kind of naturally, through the process of edits. I don't often know the actual voice on the page of the character until towards the end of my first draft. And then I will often go back and edit and be like, oh, she should sound more like this. And then I'll often edit the dialogue to sound a little bit like almost sometimes a more intense version of their voice on the page is what their actual dialogue ends up being.
Nice. Anyone else have any voice feels? So I kind of look at dialogue as your chance to showcase the fact that you know not just your point of view character's voice, but that you also know the voice of your full cast. It's your chance to kind of show off these characters are different. They're going to react to their situations differently. And I know for me, it's kind of a lot like what you said, Erin. It takes a little while. It doesn't come perfectly in the first draft by any means. I was wondering, how do you guys familiarize yourselves with the voice of your side characters?
Good question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this falls under familiarize, but I tend to base my side character's voice on the first interaction that I ever have with them, which I suppose is kind of just, in general, you set the scene, this is what they're kind of going to be. But I have seen other characters that it's hey, Becky, let's, go do this thing. And they're the main characters. Oh, I don't know. And then, I don't know, Sarah. And then Sarah's like, oh, come on, it'd be so fun. And then later Sarah's just like, I just want to hang out and not do anything. And that doesn't quite match. So to me, I'm always like, oh, well, how would like, how is it best going to... Oh no, words. What are words? I can do words. I'm an English major. Like parallel or like work off of another. Parallel's not the right word. Contrast. We got there. Wow, I'm so sorry. Daylight savings time truly has just warped my brain. Who is going to contrast the best? And then usually I try and write them as a
totally. I love that
side character.
Yeah, I love that point of contrasting side characters because you have the most interesting interactions that way. It's a good point.
Yeah, I think John Truby talks about that a lot in The Anatomy of Story, this idea of like making all of your characters, even the ones who aren't antagonists, a foil to your character in some regard. Even if like they want the same things that your character wants. They want what's best for your character. They definitely have different methods that they would take to get to it. So like look at that.
And it doesn't mean that every conversation between the characters is going to be an argument. They're just going to look at things really differently, and thus, like when they talk to one another, they're going to have different point of views through that. I find actually, I was going to say, one of my favorite things to do with side characters is take little bits of either characters from movies or TV shows or people I know in real life, and not like copy them, obviously, because that would be blatantly obvious and get me in trouble. But like people's speech patterns and stuff, like I really like listening to that and be like, oh, this person says this filler word a lot, or this person, have a Hungarian uncle who says, every 5 words, because that's what he says instead of And I'm not necessarily going to put in there constantly, but like his speech pattern and like style and how he expresses himself is really unique and interesting. So I'm like, I will definitely at some point probably write a side character that has his speech patterns, just like a little piece of somebody real.
Yeah,
makes it easier.
Yeah. I tend to, like, whenever I write people, I tend to kind of embody them. Like, I remember was writing a story where there was a character who was just like, she was so angry about everything, and I was just
You're
in
frowning
a funk for like a whole, like, I was just so mad at everything.
Yes.
And then I think I wrote her mother as this very like cool, calm, kind of collected person, and like having to switch between the two when writing a scene was just like, I was exhausted by the end of it.
Are you one of those writers who can't write in coffee shops because you're like glaring and like smiling?
Sometimes I absolutely like I love writing in coffee shops, but sometimes I imagine that people walking by me, like, they're probably more invested in me than I am in my story, because they're like, what's going
on with this girl?
Yeah, exactly. I also like what Joe Catherine said in the comments. My first draft is just 5 of me wearing a different wig. Like, that's absolutely me.
Amazing.
One of the things I've been having a lot of fun with lately, I know we've done chats on the past about like using Myers-Briggs and like Pinterest character inspiration and love languages. And I know those systems are pretty flawed overall, but it can be fun for helping you get the basis of your characters. I've been having a lot of fun with the Enneagram types. It's like the Learning the Enneagram website. You can look at what your character's Enneagram type might be, and you can see like, well, what would a relationship between this character and someone with this other personality type look like? What would their conflict look like? And I found that really inspiring, especially in like sequences where there's lots of dialogue, helping me to figure out, well, how do I place these players? How might they react if one person says this thing versus another?
I sometimes like to start with just like a really small like meme sort of thing. So like there's like the meme where like you're pulling up to the McDonald's and the kids in the back ask for like, you just pull into McDonald's and the responses are like, the kids are in the back chanting McDonald's, 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 and then the driver, the character, like, are they going to say like McDonald's, McDonald's, McDonald's with the kids, or are they gonna like say we have food at home, let's just eat food at home, or are they going to like pull into the drive-through and order 1 black coffee and drive away?
I was gonna say it sounds like a John Mulaney thing.
Yeah.
Are they the bad guy? I don't know. Are they the villain?
I don't know where this came from, but it's like something I see, and so like for me, I'm like, I kind of start by organizing all of my characters into like, are they the chanting McDonald's, or are they the 1 black coffee, or are they the...
That's so specific, and I really like that.
I love it. It's like a modern take on character development.
Right, and I have a few things like that like I like to think through just when I'm starting a character, because like sometimes like dealing with a whole personality type is like really overwhelming, but just like if I can sort them into one of the McDonald's categories.
Well, that's kind of what people do, like, as old and tired as this is, but when they do the Hogwarts houses, that's kind of like, it's a major oversimplification. Like, there's that joke on Twitter that goes, you have the mean kids, the loyal kids, the brave kids, and then what was the other one?
Miscellaneous kids.
Miscellaneous
kids. Oh no!
Right, like it's way too specific. Like just one characteristic isn't okay. It's not, you know, a proper character. But using that to first figure out, well, is my character a villain? Are they like the charge into battle type? Or are they more cautious? Are they book read? You know, like that type of thing can start out the shape of a character.
Yeah.
And that whole like pigeonholing characters things is something I think you have to be really careful of with side characters, particularly. Like if you're not in their head or they're not on the page a lot, it can be really easy to make them just kind of like this like very like cardboard cutout, like this is the snarky character, this is the reserved character, this is the funny outgoing character, you know, and like they use this one catchphrase all the time and it gets really annoying. So like I think that is one thing. I think sometimes it's okay, I think, that like we don't think about voice and dialogue too much, especially in the first draft, because I think you can get really bogged down in this character has to sound this way. And we don't all like, yeah, we all have our like things we do, we all have our personalities, but we don't always speak the same way in every situation, or you know, so I think sometimes it can be good to kind of like step back from it and try not to focus on it too much, because that can end up harming you.
For sure.
So speaking of thinking more about your side characters, just kidding, we're gonna go back one. Back. So I love all the things you guys said. I agree. I think it's good to have like a general idea of what you want and not get too bogged down if they change and evolve over time. Like that's totally fine. Today we're going to have 4 to 5 exercises depending on how long we take to get through it all. And they're going to have tailoring for if you're drafting right now or if you're revising right now. That way, hopefully we can get most writers. So exercise 1 is going to be a 5-minute exercise. Just who is in this scene? Either you are about to start writing a scene that has some dialogue in it, or you are looking at a scene that you have already written. Take 5 minutes to write down the names of each character in your scene and just a little bit about their personality or their backstory, something that is going to help you get a better idea for how everyone might be interacting with each other in your scene. I'm just going to set a timer for 5 minutes and we're just going to get going with that. So check-in will be at the 51-ish. And time. So I'm planning on us moving right into the second exercise. I kind of organized these so they would go back to back. So we're just going to pause and do a quick check-in. I've seen we've had a couple questions, and I'm going to save them for the point in the chat that I think they'll fit the best. So I'm not ignoring them. Misty Kate said, dang, I walked away and missed the beginning. Don't worry, we have the notes in the description box. If you're joining us late, I have links to the notes I am reading directly from right now, and also to the slides. So it's all there already. So yeah, I want us to move right into exercise 2, which is kind of a scene warm-up. We're going to take 15 minutes to go over the scene that you're revising or draft a new dialogue sequence to work with. If you're revising, feel free to change things if you've already gotten some ideas for how to improve your work. Some things that I think are worth considering as you're going through doing a dialogue-focused pass. What mental state are your characters in during this scene? You know, if you've gotten good news, but one of you is happy and one of you is really sad, you're going to react differently. What kind of conversation are they having? Is it friendly? Is it angry? And also, what is the end goal of this conversation? What is the big point that is going to reach the end of the scene that you're trying to get to? Do they need to learn a new piece of information? Do their hands need to brush? And that's like the big thing you're building towards. Do you just really want someone to like tip someone else's chin up with your sword or something, you know, like another style? Like, what are you building up towards with this conversation?
The only acceptable answer.
Yeah.
I saw something online that was like, yeah, lightsabers are cool and all, but can you use them to slowly tilt someone's chin up? No, you can't. Sword
The
wins.
answer is no.
I think not. So yeah, we are gonna just get going right away again. So we're gonna check in at, what is that? The 8? I'll set a timer, but I think it's the 8. Good luck. And time. Hopefully that was enough time for everyone to get a scene written down that you can keep working on. Take a minute. How are you guys feeling?
Good.
Better than before.
Excellent. So now we're going to move into talking about said and unsaid. I think it was Joe Catherine who made a comment at the very beginning that was like, well, as you know, Bob, and that's what we're talking about. So basically just trying not to fall into the, well, as you know, trap, and just the general idea that what your character doesn't say is just as important as what they do say. Let me pull up my notes again. So think about your character's voice when they're conveying emotions. For example, everyone responds differently to happiness. I mentioned that a little earlier. The first thing that came to my mind is my spouse and I, when he's excited about something, he dives right into forward thinking, planning out like, what if the best case scenario happens because this good thing has happened? And like, well, if this happens, then we'll do this and it'll be great. And when something good happens to me, I tend to withdraw a little because I don't like to get my heart set on it until I've looked at all the contingencies, like what's possible, what could happen that could make this fall through. And once I'm sure I'm past all the contingencies, then I can get really excited. And
interesting.
So like when something good happens, a conversation between him and me is going to go really different than that same conversation would go between him and his sister, who is also very optimistic, possibly like more so than he is. Similarly, some people are going to be more attuned to people's responses. Some people are going to try and figure out exactly what a person is thinking before they respond with their own thoughts or before they reveal a plot twist. And others might just throw the grenade and sprint out of the room. Side note, I really like the emotion thesaurus. Let me make myself bigger. The emotion thesaurus is great for kind of messing around and trying to figure out how people might respond to different emotional things. So big recommend there. I love it and use it for every single book I've ever written.
Same. That's too funny.
I would grab my copy, but it's in a box somewhere.
It is never not beside me. I need it. Get back in.
But, you know, sometimes a conversation does really need to happen. Like, people do need to convey information. So I was wondering, how do you guys manage the balancing act of providing information and keeping the scene / the discussion at hand vibrant feeling?
I think it's like a balance between, like, it can't be a as you know Bob type thing, but like real people do discuss things that are ongoing or that are going to happen, and then you can kind of fill in a little bit of the blanks with the narrative, or like, this is what happened last year, as the character's thinking about if they're nervous, if they're excited, and sort of sprinkle in the rest of, if you need a little bit of backstory or explanation, just sprinkle it in to offset, so you're not doing any kind of information dumping type thing.
Another good one is like, hey, remember when? Or like, you remember when this thing happened, right? And if they're like, oh yeah, it was crazy, you're like, great, and they like keep going.
Yeah.
Also, if you can think of a way that like maybe they're adding information to something that the other person already knows, so it's kind of like, hey, remember this thing I told you about before? Well, like, here's a new update on it, so that it makes sense that they would be bringing it up. You know, they're not just randomly bringing it up.
True. Yeah. And also, you can keep conversations moving and interesting by like describing what's going on around them. Are they walking to something? And give it a sense of purpose, that type of thing.
For sure, yeah. That's a note that I have. Is for me, it's all about the scene interaction. Like, what are they doing while they're having this conversation? Like, once you've picked out, well, what really needs to be said and what would this person actually say, have them say it while they're doing something. And then if you can add in some interesting character chemistry, that
Exactly.
doesn't hurt either.
Or like
Or even
actions doing, like if you're having a conversation and the person says, okay, sure, but they're like really like clenching their jaw, or they're like tapping their fingers on a table, like that's not
the micro tension.
exactly. That's not what they're really saying.
And I also really like in scenes like that, adding like details that tell you a little bit about the character. Like if they're in one person's house, the other person can be like, oh, this lady is like a giant quilt on her wall, so she clearly quilts in her spare time, or like whatever little details you can pick up on, especially if it's in somebody's house, or like the way that somebody else reacts to their surroundings. Like if they take a drink of the coffee and they're too eager and they burn themselves and you see them wince, they're not paying attention. They're a little spacey, like just little things like that. Right.
Yeah, I was actually going to say like, try and like trust your readers more than I think our instinct is to like explain everything,
over-explain everything.
But like trust them that they can figure things out. And if it's important enough, then sure, tell them. But like, yeah, like if they, if one of the characters, notices a quilt on the wall and like there's a blue ribbon stuck to it, like that's all, you don't need to like explain that this person's really great at quilting, you can kind of let readers infer some things and figure out some things on their own.
Or even if you said like, oh, there's a quilt on the wall and there's a throw pillow here, you can probably tell that person is going to be like a very calm, maybe slightly grandmotherly person.
I really like what Joe Catherine says here. Like, a conversation is boring is discussing the new house while unpacking. An interesting conversation is discussing the new house while ignoring something in the attic moving around. I'm like, oh yeah, I love that.
That's great.
And I think something to keep in mind with this too is really thinking about who is saying this thing, who is conveying this piece of information that you're trying to get across. Is the person really wordy? Are they going to talk a lot? Are they going to say less? Are they going to meander into a story and like leave the character to try and figure it out? They're like, I gave you the backstory, and they're like, you told me a myth. Sorts of things. So we've got another exercise. Talk less, go through your scene, or continue writing your new scene if you're not at an editing point yet. This time, monitor and adjust for things your character wouldn't say. Also, if you want to convey something a character might not want known, try showing this through their body language and their interaction with the scene. Let's do like 7 minutes, because I love making math hard, and that 15-minute one was just a little long. And also, we're having lots of good conversation. So we'll do 7 minutes. So that'll be the 24. And yeah, good luck. And time. So I'm gonna move us right along. Next up, we're gonna be talking about banter.
Everyone's favorite.
So clever dialogue is not something that comes super naturally to me. I usually have to know the characters really, really, really well before I feel comfortable writing banter, which means for me, I'm not adding in banter till probably the third draft, unless I'm like really consciously doing it as like a character understanding exercise or something. So I wanted to open it up first off with a question for you guys and for the audience too, if you have any banter tips. What are your best banter tips?
My entire first draft are the opposite. They're just banter.
That's why I was so glad when you said you were coming. I was like, I have a section on banter. This is Kyra's thing.
I was like waiting for Kyra.
I think for me, one of the best banter tips I guess I can think of is like, think of like what is the most obvious response, and then like just keep thinking until you come up with something that's like not the thing that you'd first think to say. Because that's the thing is like, your characters are like clever because they're reacting in the moment and saying things, but you don't have to be as clever because you can sit through and think through all of the possible responses.
Thank God.
Also, like, anytime you have like words that could mean multiple things, like use that to your advantage, like, or like ambiguous phrasing that someone could interpret in a way that's funny.
Taking things literally, I think, is also quite fun.
Yes. It just always comes back to that like character chemistry. I have some notes. The first thing, obviously, know your characters, especially knowing people's weaknesses and what would challenge them gives you an opportunity to look at like, what could someone say that would throw your character off guard and make them have to like work for their witty response and make the witty response land and be like, oh, dang, look at you go. And going along with that, KM Wayland said that truly funny dialogue is not based on one-liners. And I really think that applies to banter generally as well. Like the situation and the person delivering the line have to be well crafted for the line to hit as clever or as funny as you want it to land. And if you don't know them well, you're not going to know what a clever response is for them. Like if you've got a sunshine character and a grumpy character, a sharp comeback for the grumpy character is probably something cutting, astute, and concise. For the sunshine character, it'll be astute, but it'll probably be like really simple and optimistic and like get to the heart of something that would really kind of throw a grumpy character off of their game. So in short, banter should reveal something about your character, even if it's a subtle something. Banter can show you, what are they not willing to look at too closely? What are they noticing about the other characters? Are they uncomfortable versus comfortable? For some people, banter is a sign that they're really comfortable with you. For others, it's a sign that they want to keep you at an arm's length. Like, what is this telling you about the characters? And then lastly, what is this banter building towards? Is it going to lead up to a fight, a reconciliation, or, on a more general like plot scale, is it going to build up to a plot twist, a friendship, a romance? Banter for banter's sake is fun, but if it isn't pushing your characters along the path of their arc, it's not going to land well for the reader. So yeah, and unfortunately, I wish there was like a really easy like A plus B equals banter formula. But I think the best way is to make a concerted effort to try. So we are going to move into another 7-minute exercise because 7 seems great. We've got our beakers to remind you of character chemistry. For the next 7 minutes, try writing a scene with banter or editing one if you have one prepared. Keeping in mind, what is the setting and how can you use it to your advantage? How can your characters surprise each other? And what do their responses say about their personalities? So I'm going to set a timer. We will come back at the 36 for our last section. And time. We had some really great comments on banter that I wanted to add to the conversation. And Griswold said, it's not just about cleverness. The unexpected makes for the best banter to me. Definitely. Helen said, I feel like also character tension and hidden agenda helps with banter too, which definitely. And then Stephanie said, I love writing banter, especially when one character is very clever and the other is just very angry and flustered.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. We had a question from My Crafty Life. Do you guys have any tips on writing good dialogue that sounds realistic and still helps move the story forward?
I think it's helpful to consider, like, anytime your characters are having a conversation, why are they having that conversation? And I say that on 2 levels. So, like, the first level is, like, why in the context of your storytelling? Is that something that's useful for the reader to listen in on? What is, like, the reader getting out of it? Is it, like, developing their characters or their relationship, or somehow using it to convey information about the world? But then kind of in an internal way, why are the characters talking about that? So, like, if you think about your real life conversations, it's like, you know, if I'm sitting in a room with my mom, like, and I start talking to her, why am I starting talking to her? Is it because, like, I think I have something that she'll be interested in knowing? Is it because I have something I, like, need to tell her? Because rarely, if ever, like, we talking just for the sake of talking. I mean, maybe in certain scenarios, like, you know, if you're on, like, a first date, you might feel like you need to talk because being silent, awkward. But if I'm, like, just hanging out, like, you know, in my living room and I'm reading and my mom's reading, and, you know, I'm not just going to start up a conversation just for the sake of it. So, like, within the context of the story, why are your characters talking to each other?
Sure. We also had a question that kind of goes along with, we're going to move into the nuts and bolts of dialogue for our last part, and then I'll show you guys an exercise that you can do at home if you're feeling like it, because we're already going just a little long. But Araya asked, do you guys have any tricks to represent foreign accents in dialogue? I always find it weird because the English isn't always going to be proper/standard.
I think we touched on this a little bit. I can't remember in which chat, but a lot of really good examples of an author doing an accent is using kind of the rhythm of that accent, or using not catchphrases. What's the word I'm looking for?
Like colloquialisms?
Yeah, thank you. Of that region, rather than, like, doing a full-on, like, Hagrid style accent. Like, I didn't find that particularly distracting, but I know that some people did. But a lot of people aren't going to want to read a, like, word for word written out accent.
Yeah, I think you can just say, you know, when you meet the character, like, they had an accent, this is what it sounds like. Like, analyze what an accent sounds like. Are the vowels longer? Are the consonants harder or softer? Or just those kinds of things. And then if there is a colloquialism, or, you know, you want to put A in because they're Canadian or something, like, as long as you're using it sparingly, people are going to just be like, oh yeah, you said they have an accent.
Yeah.
And I think
one of the ones
doing I remember.
I think doing, like, trying to, like, completely write out an accent, if it's not an accent that you have, can also come across as, like, really offensive sometimes too, because like, you may not get it right. Like, you may think like you know how to write it out or something, and you're not doing it right. So that's part of the reason I would avoid it, not just because it's distracting and can be annoying to read, but also because you could do it wrong.
Maggie Stiefvater does it really well for Adam in the Raven Boys cycle.
Yeah. I was gonna say there's another part of Raven Boys that I remember when, I think it's Mr. Gray first comes to town. He stops in a sandwich shop and the woman has an accent, but Maggie Stiefvater doesn't write out her accent. I think she just says, like, the lady said something about the Henrietta Electric Company, but her accent made it sound like Henrietta Electric Company or something like that.
That's what she does with Adam as well. When he says something to Blue, Blue thinks that his accent makes it come out soft and sound like this with his drawl, and you know immediately how it sounds, but she doesn't have to write it on the page. Yeah.
And it's something that's used sparingly. You know, you don't have to use it all the time.
Exactly. Like, you know, I think you know right away that he has an accent. Like, she tells you that, but then she gives you that little reminder, like a few more chapters in, and then you don't really hear about it much after that, because you know by that point that he's got a drawl.
Big recommend for those audiobooks. The narrator is so good.
That's actually what I was thinking of. So I was like, I love Will Patton's voice. It's so good.
Yes. So we're going to move into this last little section, the nuts and bolts of dialogue. I wanted to wrap up with some of the more technical, like, rules. I'm putting them in big quotation marks because, again, if the conventions of storytelling that you're using demand something else, then yeah, you don't have to do all these things. You know, storytelling is so different all over the world. It's different across genres. So if you hear this and you're like, I'm not going to do that, and this is why, like, that's fine. And then kind of on the flip side of that, if you're well-versed in things that are typically expected in dialogue with storytelling, then you will be able to break those rules in ways that can create an experience for the reader, that can set them on edge because it's not what they're expecting, or that can kind of bring them into a more relaxed feeling or something. So the first thing is white space. Consider white space on the page. Do you have chunks of dialogue that span a full paragraph or possibly more? That's probably a sign that you need to go through and break up what's being said some. Every now and then it's going to be okay, but if you have it happening a lot, it's a sign that you have a problem with your dialogue, most likely. Things you can consider there. Are you saying things that need to be said? For example, when I'm writing a dual POV book, a dual point of view book, if you have one character who's experienced something and now is relaying it to the other character, could you just do a transition sentence? Because we as the reader know all this information, and what really matters to us is seeing this new character's reaction to it. And then also in this vein, kind of a side tip that I didn't really know where to put it was use names sparingly. It's pretty rare for people to use names, especially full names, when speaking to someone. I know I personally pretty much only do it in like these live chats where there's 5 to 10 of us at any one time. So interruptions and hesitation. These happen a lot in actual conversations and are great for building or loosening tension in your book. They're especially useful during big moments. You could outright say character hesitated, or you can kind of build in a hesitation by having them interact with the scene a bit before responding. And dialogue tags should also be used sparingly. If you notice you've got a lot of dialogue tags going on, see if you can swap some of them out with character and scene interactions. Or just said. We have a lot of videos on that, so I figured we didn't need to devote a ton of time to dialogue tags.
But I have thoughts and feelings.
Next up, make sure you're providing style variation. So if every paragraph looks like, or every sequence looks like this is a sentence. A said, "Oh, really?" B went around the table until they were nose to nose with A. Yes, really. A bit their bottom lip, hesitant. You're wrong. You don't even know what a sentence is, B said. You've got like dialogue tag or reaction, dialogue tag or reaction. And it's the same format in every line. And that's going to make readers' eyes glaze over. Vary it up. Put some stuff before. Have some dialogue with no dialogue tag, no reaction. Like move it along. It's the same as with regular sentences. You don't want them all to be the same length. You don't want them all to be in the same shape.
I would also like to point out that Megan did not have to say B said it aggressively, because we can tell by their action. She's coming around the table and she's nose to nose. You know she's aggressive. You don't need the dialogue tag.
I had a little bit too much fun and had to scale back that example because it was a whole A, B, enemies to lovers thing. Where they were, and I was like, we don't need this. We're gonna go.
He's like writing a whole novel after her.
Yeah.
And they're just mad about sentences. Like it never got beyond sentences.
Can I send you my money? I'd like to read that immediately.
Yes. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is buried dialogue. This is something that you might not have heard of if you're a newer writer. I only learned about it back when I was in Pitch Wars 700,000 years ago. So you almost always want to avoid dialogue that is buried between two or more non-dialogue sentences. Because of the way that humans read, it's almost guaranteed they will glaze past the dialogue. And if you've got important information there or important character building there, it's going to get lost most likely. So you always want your dialogue to be, there's a sentence before, or some sentences after, but like the dialogue needs to be, boom, new paragraph to help draw readers' gazes to it. The exception being, of course, if you know this rule and you want to obscure some piece of information, it's a mystery or something, then sure, bury away. Just, if you're seeing that happen a lot, go through and you want to clean up that dialogue and put it on its own paragraph. We have a question from MM Ward, which is a really great one. Dialogue between more than two people without dialogue tags hasn't been addressed. How do you recommend handling it?
As each character should definitely have their own distinct voice. Like if I've done my job well, you should be able technically to have like a few sentences or maybe even half a page and know which character is saying which thing. And like I'm always going to have actions around it usually, but even if I often write about girls falling in love, so it's she, so I have to make sure that they are distinctly different and that you technically would be able to tell their dialogue apart if I didn't use dialogue tags.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's definitely instances where just having dialogue with no tags, no action can be really cool and like create this cool, like, oh, we're moving, we're grooving. But yeah, the characters, you need to make it very clear right before you start that section, like who has said the most recent thing. And then when you jump in, you should make sure that the voices are very clear. It shouldn't be like a "how was your day" sort of conversation.
Yeah, I would reserve, like I've done that before. I think I always reserve it for something that's really like, it's like a go thing. So it's usually an argument or like a really tense discussion, and then there's action afterwards. I think it's like when I look back on using those things, it's usually in some really tense form of conversation.
And I think it's important to say for this question, and Erin like sort of touched on this, but it's important to say that no dialogue tags doesn't mean like no description. It doesn't mean it's just dialogue. So like Erin kind of mentioned, like you could say like Megan walks around the table and then have the dialogue, and then Megan's the one saying it. So so like it doesn't have to be that you don't mention them at all, but it's just not saying Megan said.
Exactly.
And also, I think what people are talking about a lot when they talk about like avoid dialogue tags, like even though said is a dialogue tag, they're more referring to like, oh, he muttered this and then she whispered that. And then they yelled this, the big description-y dialogue tags.
Yeah, exactly.
We had Joe Catherine said, I'm team adverb. Anyone else? I do love a well-placed adverb. My inclination is always to use too many.
I like adverbs too, which is surprising because I get twitchy sometimes. Like if I read in a book like she muttered angrily, I will fling the book across the room in anger. But if it's like she said and then comma irritated, or she said quietly, I'm fine with that. Actually, J.K. Rowling does that a lot, and it doesn't bother me. I kind of like it actually. But if it's done sparingly. But yeah, if you put like the dialogue tag that's like a creative one that like she, I don't know, muttered menacingly. Yeah, I'm done. It's over.
Megan Misty Kate said, I always thought commas were my downfall. Then I started with Pro Writing Aid and discovered my commas were fine, but my adverbs are totally amok.
Amok.
Well, Joe Catherine also says that there's a weekly meeting for Adverbs Anonymous. So anybody who needs to can sign up for that.
Another meeting of AA that I've never heard of. I like that.
All right, I've got one exercise that I'm going to leave with you guys. And if you're feeling inspired, you can do it right now, or you can just keep it in mind next time you're revising. But we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any last minute dialogue questions, get them in right now, because after we share this, we're going to answer any final questions and then head out. So the last exercise to do at home, make it shine. Go through your dialogue sequences and make them shine technically. Look at the white space. Are your sentences varied? Is any of your dialogue unintentionally buried? So yeah, definitely do that on your own time. Once again, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if we're waiting for, if people want to get a few last questions, and I had a note actually that I forgot to say for Megan, your example of like the banter when you were talking about a sunshiny person versus like a grouchy person. I was like, that almost, to me, that's a great example of like where the banter would almost be like naturally going to happen. Because I don't know about you, but as a reader, I find it hilarious when there's like a grouchy person and they're like so fed up with the sunshiny person. Mm-hmm. So if you, that might be a natural segue into banter, is having two characters that are just like going to sort of irritate each other or be so opposite that it's like, how can these people even get along type of thing. So yeah, I thought I would mention that.
Yes, I'm also a big fan of people who just escalate each other. I'm thinking like Troy and Abed in Community, where they like are such good friends that like if one of them starts going, they just boom, 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 boom.
Totally.
Yeah, once again, thank you so much for watching, everyone. We had really great comments, really great questions. Once again, I have links to these slides and to my notes, which is pretty much word for word all the things that I have said in the description box. Give us a comment if you're watching this after the fact. Let us know your favorite dialogue tips and tricks. As always, please like and subscribe if you like us and want to be subscribed to our content. And yeah, we will be back next week with, what is next week? I have it. I pre-scheduled all of our live chats. So I remember someone made a comment that was like, could you schedule them out earlier? And so we did that. They are all in their own playlist right now. Does someone have pulled up what next week's is?
I'm trying to, let's see. Okay.
And they all have beautiful thumbnails.
They do. So why is it not on?
Oh, writing family relationships is next week.
Yes, right.
Yes.
I'm excited.
Family. Yes.
The amazing thumbnail of the family standing on piles of books.
I'm also excited because I am an only child, but I'm currently trying to attempt to write a family of like 6. So like,
yes,
like, I need everyone with siblings to beta read for me.
Perfect. All right. We have videos every Tuesday and Thursday, and yeah, we'll be back on Sunday. So be sure to check us out then. Thank you so much. We love you guys. We will see you later. Bye.
Bye.